In the dimly lit room, Emily sat trembling, unsure of the misfortune that awaited her. The door creaked open, and a man's heavy breathing filled the space. Emily dared not look up. She silently began to remove her clothes.
In such a hurry? He sneered, watching Emily hastily undressing. His laughter was filled with disdain.
Emily's heart clenched. 5 years had passed, but she instantly recognized his voice. She looked up to see his face through the dim light.
James? Her mind buzzed with disbelief. She never imagined they would meet again in such a manner after 5 years apart.
Emily quickly tried to put her clothes back on, but James lunged at her, grabbing her hands.
Emily, after 5 years, are you still pretending to be innocent in front of me? His words stung, and tears welled up in Emily's eyes. She couldn't cry out or resist. She feared James would leave if she did.
Emily desperately needed the money. It was her father's lifeline. She had to get it, no matter what.
Kneel, he commanded, watching her with steely eyes.
Emily bit her lip, her heart full of grievances she wanted to voice to James. But what right did she have now? Without hesitation, she knelt before him. She needed the money. Dignity was a luxury she couldn't afford.
Open your eyes and bark like a dog, he demanded, gripping her chin.
Woof, 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 she complied, her eyes shut tight.
Emily, do you know how disgusting you look right now?
Emily kept her head down, silent. After a moment of cruel satisfaction, James grabbed Emily's hair and slowly unbuckled his belt.
Go on, weren't you eager just now? Why the act now? He yanked her hair repeatedly, sweat pouring from Emily's forehead.
Emily silently wept, biting her fist to stifle her cries. James finally stood up, panting. Seeing Emily on the floor like a dog, James frowned and prepared to leave.
Emily, the money is here. If you want it, come and get it. He quickly dressed and opened a small case, revealing stacks of cash.
It was her father's lifeline. Emily didn't hesitate. She crawled towards the money. Just as she reached James, he lifted the case and dumped it over her head. The bills scattered, mirroring her shattered heart. James sneered as Emily knelt, picking up the money piece by piece. Each bill felt unbearably heavy.
Emily, you're filthy. You disgust me. He spat, stepping on her hand as he reached for his jacket.
Emily's fingers throbbed with pain, tears streaming down her face. She bowed her head lower, not wanting James to see her like this. He hated her, hurt her, but she wanted to show him only her best side. James's final words echoed in her mind. She wanted to tell him she wasn't filthy, that he was the only man she had ever been with. At the hospital, Emily hurriedly walked towards her father's attending doctor's office with the money in hand.
Agitated, what? How could this happen?
Serious, Miss Emily, I understand how you feel, but your current health condition doesn't allow you to donate a kidney to your father.
Desperate, doctor, I beg you, I'm healthy. Please, let me donate my kidney to my father, or he'll pass away.
Serious, your body isn't suitable for a kidney transplant right now. Do you have any siblings who could be tested?
Siblings? Emily's heart ached. She had only one sister, but with no other choice, Emily decided to try her luck. In front of the mansion, it was the first time in 5 years that Emily had stood there.
Whispering, Isabella.
5 years ago, when her father fell ill and her own heart began to fail, her mother had taken her sister and remarried into the mansion, giving her sister a new name the very next day.
Surprised, Emily?
A woman's voice came from behind her, snapping Emily out of her thoughts. It was Isabella, who had appeared behind her without her noticing.
Pleading, sis, dad, he.
Slap! Before Emily could finish her sentence, Isabella slapped her across the face. Emily clutched her face helplessly. She had anticipated this reaction.
Pleading, sis, I beg you, please save Dad. He's not going to make it.
Ugh. Your dad is the one who's not going to make it. If you keep talking nonsense, I'll break your filthy mouth. Isabella snapped, pulling her hand away and wiping every inch of skin Emily had touched with a tissue. Isabella's actions reminded Emily of James. She wasn't dirty, she really wasn't. Emily felt like crying, but she held back. No matter how much she suffered, she chose to bear it alone.
Pleading, he's my dad. He's seriously ill. Please, save him.
Unfriendly, Emily, I'll save your dad, but it'll cost you $100,000 for my nutrition. Can you afford that?
Emily knew Isabella was making things difficult for her. She and her father had been destitute since he fell ill 5 years ago. Where could she possibly find that kind of money now?
Weekly, all right.
Even if she knew she couldn't do it, she had to agree. She was determined to save her father.
Unfriendly, I'll give you a business card. You can make money there quickly and easily.
Isabella said, tossing a card at Emily before turning and walking back into the mansion. Only when the door slammed shut did Emily collapse to the ground, gasping for air. Emily glanced at the business card Isabella had thrown. The familiar name on it stung her eyes once again. Arriving at the address on the business card, the receptionist immediately handed Emily a set of clothes and hurried her towards a room. It was a very revealing maid outfit. With a pounding heart, Emily knocked on the door. To her surprise, Isabella was the one to open it. Isabella smiled and yanked Emily into the room.
Isabella, what are you doing?
Oh, Emily, looking like that, you're perfect for the job.
With a thud, Emily crashed into a man's chest. The man's broad chest felt very familiar to Emily, even his scent seemed recognizable.
Emily?
Stumbling to the ground, Emily recognized the voice immediately. She dared not look up at James's face. When she finally did, she saw dozens of men behind him.
James,
Emily, what are you doing here? And dressed like this?
James's disgusted gaze swept over Emily, his disdainful expression unmistakable. Emily clutched her chest tightly, feeling her heart stop cold for several seconds.
Emily, long time no see.
These were all friends from their school days, James's close buddies. Now, seeing her in this state, Emily wished she could run out of the room immediately. She lowered her head even more and tried to push through the crowd. Just as she was about to escape, Isabella suddenly stepped on her dress from behind. Rip! Emily's thin maid outfit fell apart, and she instinctively screamed and squatted down to cover herself. It wasn't until a young man she had never seen before draped his suit over her that Emily felt a bit calmer.
Stop. Don't you want to make money?
James casually wrote a check and waved it in front of Emily.
This is a check for $1 million. If you meet my demands, it's yours.
The room fell silent. A man with a wicked smile sidled up to James. Seeing James remain indifferent, he silently reached out his hand.
What are you doing?
Emily, who had been standing there like a child waiting for punishment, suddenly felt a hand on her.
You're already selling yourself. Selling to James or to me, it's all the same. The money won't be any less.
The man chuckled and pulled out a check.
No. I can't.
Emily shook her head repeatedly. She didn't want to sell herself to another man. She weakly turned her gaze to James, hoping he would stop the man.
Come on, sweetheart, let's chat in the next room?
The man waved the check in front of Emily but didn't humiliate her like James. Instead, he placed it in her hand.
I can't betray him.
The man's smile faded when he saw Emily throw the check aside.
You shameless wretch, how dare you refuse?
With a slap, the man struck Emily's face, causing her to fall back. The men in the room couldn't help but feel their hearts race. Just when Emily felt utterly humiliated, a suit was draped over her shoulders. It was James. He had taken off his suit and placed it on her. Emily's eyes reddened, and she almost burst into tears.
Leave.
James turned around and kicked the man standing nearby. The men, seeing James's reaction, didn't dare to provoke Emily any further. They quickly turned away, and Emily hurriedly dressed.
James, you haven't given me the money.
She stood behind him, no longer daring to look at his face.
Take the money and get lost. Never show up in front of me again.
James handed her a check with a look of disdain. He didn't look back after giving Emily the check. He left the room, followed quickly by the others. The room was now empty except for Emily and Isabella, and the air felt suffocating.
Sis, this is $1 million.
Emily handed the check to Isabella. But Isabella didn't take it. She looked dazed, as if she had no intention of accepting the money.
Emily, do you think you can get rid of me with just $1 million? Are you treating me like a beggar?
Isabella slapped the check out of Emily's hand.
Sis, as long as you're willing to save Dad, I'll do anything you ask.
Emily fell to her knees with a thud, exhausted but still kneeling firmly in front of Isabella.
I want you to disappear. Are you willing?
I'm willing.
Emily didn't hesitate. She was already a dying person. If her departure could save her father, she would leave with tears of gratitude. Isabella's smile vanished, and she walked briskly to the door.
But I'm not willing. I want to see you all suffer one by one.
Isabella quickly left the room, her last words lingering in the air. After a long while, the scent of James faded, and Emily struggled to her feet. She stepped on the check James had given her and walked out. Emily staggered all the way to the hospital, each step more difficult than the last. Knock, knock, knock. If it weren't for Emily's father supporting her, she might have collapsed in some lonely corner, never to rise again.
Doctor, please, save my dad.
Emily finally collapsed to the ground, no longer needing to maintain her strength in front of the doctor. The doctor was stunned, looking at Emily with wide eyes.
Miss Emily, are you all right?
The doctor quickly helped Emily to a chair. Though he didn't know what she had been through, he couldn't help but feel sorry for her.
Doctor, please use my kidney to save my dad. I can't find anyone else.
Emily knew Isabella would never help. The only one who could save her father was herself.
Miss Emily, your body is already weak. I won't perform this surgery.
Emily began to kowtow, thinking that as long as the doctor wasn't as heartless as James, he would agree to her request. One after another, Emily's forehead soon began to bleed, but she didn't care.
Doctor, I won't live much longer anyway.
Emily suddenly stopped, feeling a sharp pain in her heart. She clutched her chest, gasping for breath. Slowly, she lowered her head and vomited blood.
All right, I agree.
It wasn't until she saw the determination in the doctor's eyes that Emily slowly stood up. Her eyes were red as she sat down and picked up a pen and paper from the desk. She wanted to say goodbye to James. After writing, she handed the paper to the doctor and dragged her exhausted body out of the office. She wanted to visit her father's ward. After a while in her father's room, the door opened, and the doctor entered with several nurses.
Miss Emily, let's prepare for the surgery.
Emily stood up and nodded, then followed the doctor into the operating room. Her father lay quietly beside her, and she stubbornly held his hand. The nurse began to administer anesthesia to Emily. She instinctively tightened her grip, afraid that if she let go, she would never hold her father's hand again. At the Gway Corporation, James was dealing with endless trivial matters. Ring, ring, ring. His phone rang urgently. He frowned and glanced at it, then hung up. Ring, ring, ring.
Emily, are you done? Are you out of money again? Do you want me to buy you back?
After several urgent rings, James impatiently picked up the phone. He hadn't saved Emily's number, but who else would call him so persistently?
Hello?
Emily, she's gone.
James was taken aback by the unfamiliar male voice. It wasn't Michael, who had disappeared 5 years ago. His phone clattered to the floor. What? Emily was gone? James bolted out of his office. Even though he had only felt endless hatred for Emily since she left 5 years ago, his heart ached when he heard she was gone. James rushed to the hospital in a panic. Just a few minutes ago, he had been planning how to mock Emily, but now all he could think about was getting to the hospital to find out what had happened.
Where is Emily's room?
He asked a nurse at the station, barely catching his breath. The nurse pointed to the dimly lit operating room without saying a word. James turned and saw the door was slightly ajar, with people bustling inside. He rushed over and saw 2 people lying motionless on the operating table, covered with white sheets. The doctor saw James and walked over, seemingly expecting him. James ignored the doctor and stared blankly at the white sheets, knowing that one of the faces beneath belonged to Emily.
What happened to Emily? Why is she gone?
James grabbed the doctor, pressing him against the wall. Just hours ago, Emily had been fine. How could she now be lying lifeless on the operating table? The doctor, pinned against the wall, dropped a piece of paper in his panic. James's eyes were drawn to it, noticing his name written in large letters. James slowly released the doctor and picked up the paper.
James, by the time you read this letter, I should already be gone.
As he read the first line, James felt the paper grow heavier in his hands, almost too heavy to hold.
I'm not afraid of leaving. I just can't bear to leave you. If it were possible, I would want to be with you forever. But I'm nearing the end. 5 years ago, the doctor diagnosed my heart condition. I could leave at any moment. Back then, you were preparing for your exams. I thought you shouldn't have to bear this burden with me. You have your own world, and you should live it to the fullest. So I left. I cried countless nights, but as long as you were happier without me, my suffering didn't matter. To raise money for my father's treatment, I walked into that club for the first time. I was happy because I found out the person who bought my time was you. I'm not dirty. I've only ever been with you. James, we loved and hated each other in this life. In the next, I never want to meet you again.
Tears filled James's eyes as he finished reading Emily's hastily written letter. He had wronged her. As he stood up to embrace Emily's body, he finally understood why the news of her passing had hurt so much. Love had always been there, but he had been blinded by the sands of time.
James, let it go.
A man rushed over to stop James. It was Michael. Since he had taken Emily away 5 years ago, he hadn't appeared again. Over the years, James's resentment had grown, finally exploding uncontrollably.
Michael, you bastard! Why did you take Emily away? Didn't you know she could have left us at any moment?
James stood up, glaring at Michael with burning eyes. If Michael hadn't interfered in their relationship, things wouldn't have ended up like this.
I knew, but Emily didn't want to burden you. She preferred to bear it alone rather than drag you into it, because she loved you. The man she always loved was James, not Michael.
Michael gently took Emily's hand, now cold but still feeling warm to him.
Emily, I'm taking you away.
James rushed over, his determined eyes showing that he would never allow Michael to take Emily away. But when he saw Emily's pale face, he silently stepped aside, his legs giving way as he sat on the ground.
If you really love Emily that much, why did you watch her come to the hospital without doing anything?
James was stunned. He opened his eyes in confusion. Wasn't Emily here because of her heart condition? James slowly began to recall. In the operating room, there was another body. Who was it?
It was her father.
Seeing James's bewildered expression, the doctor seemed to have anticipated his question and answered before James could speak.
Emily did everything she could to raise money for her father's treatment.
James had lost interest in the doctor's words until he heard about Emily's sister. He slowly lifted his drooping head.
I need to talk to Isabella.
James didn't want to blame everything on Isabella, but he needed to ask her why she could be so heartless, why she could watch Emily come to the hospital without saying a word.
James, what brings you here?
James turned around and calmly looked at Isabella. In the sunlight, he seemed to see Emily's shadow on her.
Isabella, why didn't you tell me about Emily's illness 5 years ago?
Isabella was taken aback, not expecting James to ask this question.
James, it was Emily who didn't want me to tell you. She said the man she truly loved was Michael. She wanted to spend her last moments with the man she loved most.
James could only smile bitterly. He now understood the kind of situation Emily had been in. Even her own sister could slander her without hesitation.
James, let's get married.
Just as James was about to turn and leave, Isabella suddenly rushed over and hugged him tightly, speaking passionately.
Isabella, I will only ever love Emily.
Turning around, James could clearly see Isabella's stiff smile frozen in midair. As James was about to leave, Isabella clung to him tightly again.
James, Emily is gone. She's gone. Why are you still holding on to someone who's no longer here?
Isabella, it's you who needs to let go. The one I love is your sister, not you. She is my wife.
Isabella finally let go of her hands. Compared to the word sister, the word wife was even harder for her to accept.
How could everything fall apart now? I've worked so hard for so many years.
With endless guilt towards Emily, James left the hospital. As soon as he stepped out, the once clear sky began to cloud over. Accompanied by the rain, James finally cried like a child. When he returned home, he fell ill and remained bedridden. Isabella took care of him tirelessly, refusing to leave. One day, a guest arrived at their home.
James, when are you and Isabella planning to get engaged?
After a series of footsteps, a man's voice appeared in James's room. It was Isabella's stepfather. Because of Isabella, her father had been helping James's company gradually get back on track. However, this time, James stubbornly ignored him.
Dad, Mom, why are you here?
Seeing that James didn't respond to her father's question, Isabella stood up to smooth things over.
We came to see if James is feeling better. It seems he's quite ill.
Isabella's father didn't notice that James had already woken up. Seeing Isabella's anxious expression, he too began to feel uneasy.
Mr. Dream, I won't be getting engaged to Isabella.
Isabella's father was taken aback, then furiously approached James.
What did you say?
He couldn't understand why James would say such a thing. Didn't he know that without the Dream family as his backing, his company could collapse at any moment?
Dad, James means we won't get engaged. We'll go straight to marriage.
Isabella said to her father while giving James pleading looks. If James could just cooperate a little, she could resolve this tricky situation.
Oh, is that so?
He shifted his gaze from Isabella to James, seeking the final answer.
No.
James never looked at Isabella. He stared indifferently at the sky, as if still searching for Emily's figure. Isabella's face darkened. Her father's face turned red with anger. He grabbed James, ready to strike.
Dad, James is sick. He's not thinking straight. Please don't take it to heart.
Isabella quickly hugged her father, pleading coquettishly. Surprisingly, her plea had some effect. Her father, unable to resist her, turned his face away in frustration.
If you and Isabella can't be together, I see no reason to continue supporting a stranger's company. You decide for yourself.
With that, Isabella's father stormed out of the house. Narrator, tone, angry James sneered as Emily knelt, picking up the money piece by piece. Each bill felt unbearably heavy in her hands.
Emily, you're filthy. You disgust me.
He spat, stepping on her hand as he reached for his jacket. Emily's fingers throbbed with pain, tears streaming down her face.
Emily, tone, sad eye. I'm not filthy.
She bowed her head lower, not wanting James to see her like this. She wanted to show him only her best side, even though he hated her and hurt her.
James, tone, shouting, don't even try to justify yourself. You're nothing to me.
Narrator, tone, serious. 2 days later, while James was in a meeting, he received a call from an unknown number.
Michael, tone, shouting, James, Tommy is missing. Did you do this? If you have any issues, come at me. Why involve the child?
James, tone, flustered Emily, I didn't do this, I swear. Don't worry, we'll call the police right now. Tommy will be fine, don't worry.
Narrator, tone, serious. James hastily tried to comfort Emily before planning to call the police. Suddenly, his phone rang again. It was another unknown number. Without thinking, James answered it. Narrator, tone, terrified. There was a deathly silence on the other end. James frowned, thinking it might be a prank call. Just as he was about to hang up, he heard Tommy's heart-wrenching cries.
James, tone, serious Tommy.
Narrator, tone, terrified. It was unmistakably Tommy's voice, even though James had only spent a short time with him.
Kidnapper, tone. Altered James want to save him? Prepare $5 million in cash.
Narrator, tone, serious. It was a woman's voice, but it had been altered by software, making it unrecognizable. The realization hit James like a thunderbolt. Tommy had been kidnapped. Narrator, tone, serious. Before James could say anything, the call ended. His mind was in a fog, but he remembered one thing clearly: Tommy had been kidnapped, and the ransom was $5 million. $5 million was no small amount for James.
James, tone, serious. I promise never to lie to Emily again. But can she handle the truth now?
Narrator, tone, serious. James decided to tell Emily the truth. She was Tommy's mother, she deserved to know. Upon hearing the news, Emily fainted.
Emily, tone, shouting, Tommy. Tommy.
Narrator, tone, sad. In the darkness, Emily woke up from a nightmare, reaching out frantically beside her. If Tommy were there, she would have held his hand tightly. With tears in her eyes, Emily had to accept the harsh reality: Tommy had really been kidnapped. Narrator, tone, sad. Emily looked around. Tommy wasn't there, Michael wasn't there, and even James, who was always nagging her, wasn't there. They were all gone. Who would save Tommy?
Michael, tone, hopeful. James let Emily go.
Narrator, tone, relieved. Through the door, Emily heard Michael's voice. Knowing Michael was by her side, her anxious heart finally relaxed. She knew that as long as Michael was there, he wouldn't let anything happen to Tommy.
James, tone, serious. Michael, can you give Emily back to me? You took her from me 8 years ago. Can you return her now?
Michael, tone, angry returner. Have you forgotten what you did to Emily 3 years ago?
Narrator, tone, sad. Michael's voice grew louder, trembling with anger. Emily knew he was upset. What had happened between her and James 8 years ago? What had James done to her 3 years ago? Emily closed her eyes, trying to remember, but she couldn't recall anything.
But I love her.
James said calmly, unafraid of competing fairly with Michael.
Is this how you show your love? 8 years ago, you loved her, so you watched her leave. 3 years ago, you loved her, so you humiliated her with money. And now, because of your love, Tommy has been taken.
Michael punched the wall heavily, his teeth grinding in anger. James didn't argue because he knew Michael was right. He couldn't refute it, he could only stay silent. 8 years ago, he was wrong. 3 years ago, he was wrong again. But now, he wouldn't let himself make the same mistake. James hurried to the hospital room, wanting to tell Emily that even if he had to sell his company, he would gather the $5 million ransom to save Tommy. With a creak, James froze as he saw Emily standing behind the door, her eyes red from crying.
Emily, don't worry. I will bring Tommy back safely. Just wait here for the good news, okay?
James tried to appear calm, but anyone could see he was just trying to reassure Emily, to keep her from being too anxious.
I'll go with you.
For the first time, Emily took the initiative to walk with James. James glanced at Michael, then pulled both of them towards the company. As long as he could save Tommy, he didn't mind. Upon arriving at the company, James hastily called an emergency meeting, deciding to sell the company to raise the ransom for Tommy. No matter the cost, James only wanted Tommy to return safely to Emily. The urgent ringing of his phone interrupted James's thoughts. He quickly answered. It was the kidnapper.
James, have you prepared the $5 million?
Please, don't hurt my child.
Emily rushed over as soon as she saw the kidnapper calling again. She didn't want to delve into the grievances between the kidnapper and James. She just wanted Tommy to return safely.
Emily, long time no see.
The cold voice on the other end sent chills down Emily's spine. Emily was stunned. The kidnapper knew her too. James was equally shocked. He had thought the kidnapper was targeting him, but it turned out they knew Emily as well.
I have the money ready. Where do we make the exchange?
The kidnapper gave an address, which James memorized.
Emily, you come along too. It's been years since we last met, and I've missed you.
Just as James was about to hang up, the kidnapper added. James and Emily exchanged glances, unable to guess the kidnapper's intentions. But it suited Emily's wishes. Live or die, she wanted to be by Tommy's side.
Wait, I need to hear Tommy's voice to know he's alive.
In the first call, James had clearly heard Tommy crying, but this time, he hadn't heard a sound from Tommy. A loud bang echoed through the phone, followed by Tommy's faint cries. Though the crying was soft, Emily, as a mother, recognized Tommy's voice instantly.
Did you hear that? Remember, if I see anyone other than you and Emily, you'll be collecting this little one's remains.
With that, the kidnapper hung up. James quickly took Emily to the designated location, while Michael quietly reported to the police, making all necessary preparations.
Emily, if I die here today, can you forgive me for what I did to you 3 years ago?
James suddenly spoke emotionally, holding Emily's hand. He didn't know why he said it, but he trusted his instincts.
James, don't say that.
Emily didn't answer his question because she didn't want his hypothetical scenario to come true. Just by saying it, James couldn't help but smile slightly. He could feel Emily's concern for him, even if it was silent. He felt it deeply. Emily didn't answer James. She didn't want to deceive him or brush him off. James, looking despondent, picked up a small box and took Emily's hand, leading her upstairs. From a distance, James saw the kidnappers waiting for them. Tommy was tied up and seemed to have passed out.
Isabella, I'm here! Let Tommy go!
Isabella turned around in surprise, not expecting that her silhouette had left such an indelible mark on James's heart that he recognized her just from her back. Emily immediately saw Tommy lying on the ground and frantically tried to rush over.
Emily, don't.
James held her back because he knew that Isabella had long since turned into a demon. 3 years ago, she had already driven Emily to despair. Today, she would be even more ruthless.
Emily, 3 years have passed, and you're still as pathetic as ever.
Isabella didn't bother asking why Emily hadn't perished 3 years ago. To her, it no longer mattered because today she would personally see to it.
She's your sister.
Emily stood there, dumbfounded, staring at James. She looked at him for a long time, unable to tell if he was joking.
Ha! Who's her sister?
Emily smiled bitterly. She didn't need such a heartless sister.
Emily, your son is in my hands. Don't you want to save him? Then crawl over here.
Isabella, annoyed by the silent exchange between James and Emily, impatiently lifted Tommy into the air, as if ready to drop him at any moment.
No!
Emily was so frightened by Isabella's actions that she didn't dare breathe. If Tommy were dropped from such a height, he would surely be gravely injured.
Isabella, the 500,000 is here. Let Tommy go. He's your family too.
James threw the ransom on the ground. To save Tommy, he would give anything, even more than 500,000.
It wasn't just Emily who was foolish, James was equally naive. Both Emily and Tommy had to be eliminated.
Even knowing that James would never forgive her, Isabella resolutely began to execute her plan. If she couldn't have James's love, neither could Emily. Isabella held Tommy aloft, smiling coldly. With just a slight release, the little one in her hands would be no more.
Sister. Please let my son go.
Emily, beg me. If you beg, I'll let your little brat go.
Isabella laughed triumphantly. Emily, terrified by Isabella's laughter, knelt down, pleading desperately. Seeing Emily trembling, Isabella felt even more triumphant. She looked down at Emily with arrogance, finally having her underfoot.
James, kill that wretch. Or I'll let go.
After Emily had knocked her head on the ground several times, Isabella issued her new command. Kill Emily? Both James and Emily were stunned. Emily couldn't believe the person standing before her was her sister. She couldn't understand why Isabella wanted her dead. James was equally shocked. He hadn't realized how twisted Isabella's mind had become. She now acted like a heartless demon.
Fine, if you let Tommy go, I'll die.
Emily lifted her head to look at Isabella. As long as Isabella let Tommy go, her own life didn't matter. Emily was ready to die, only hoping Isabella would spare Tommy.
No, Emily, don't do anything foolish.
James saw the lifeless look in Emily's eyes. He had lost her once 3 years ago, he couldn't lose her again. If someone had to die, it should be him. James slowly approached Isabella, grateful for her love but unable to reciprocate. Her love was too burdensome for him to bear. Isabella became agitated, stepping back several times as if she might fall into the abyss behind her. She shook her head repeatedly, needing just one confirming look from James to abandon everything and be with him.
The one I love is your sister, Emily, not you.
James moved closer, step by step, forcing Isabella to face the truth. She shook her head, unable to accept this ending.
If you really loved her, how could you have humiliated her in front of so many men 3 years ago?
Isabella's words made James lower his head in shame. He had not only humiliated Emily in front of others but had also repeatedly broken her heart. So he deserved to die. It should be him, not Emily. She had already suffered once, now it was his turn to repay his debt.
Emily, I love you.
Isabella looked at Emily, who was pretending to be stubborn, and felt a surge of anger.
It's okay, I don't blame her.
James said softly, then walked towards Isabella with a determined look.
Stop.
Isabella commanded. She knew that if James got close to Tommy, she would lose her advantage.
Isabella, let him go. The child is innocent.
James, he's innocent, but what about me? Have you ever considered my feelings? Am I not innocent?
Isabella's voice grew agitated. She was used to playing the tragic figure, never realizing that she had created this tragedy herself.
Emily, do you know why your heart failed 8 years ago?
Isabella asked, looking at the helpless Emily. She knew the reason all too well.
Because I ruined your heart.
James was stunned. So, it was all Isabella's doing.
Isabella, are you insane? Do you know you could have hurt Emily?
Yes, I wanted her gone. She deserved it for loving you. She deserved it.
Isabella retreated to the edge, moving slowly as if waiting for something.
Emily, don't you want to save your son? He's here. I'll count to 3. If you don't come over, don't blame me for what happens.
Emily wasn't afraid of anything as long as Tommy could live safely.
3.
Isabella started counting, and Emily quickened her pace.
2.
Isabella glanced behind her. If she fell from here, she would be shattered.
1.
Isabella let go. Emily screamed and lunged forward, knocking Isabella off the edge. Emily quickly grabbed Tommy, relieved that she had managed to hold on to him. But she lost her balance and felt herself falling with Isabella.
Oth women clung to the edge, struggling desperately.
Emily, don't let go.
James rushed over, grabbing Emily's hand and trying to pull her up.
James, save me. I don't want to die.
Isabella pleaded, still holding on, hoping James would save her first. James didn't reach out to her, not even glancing back.
James, goodbye. If there's a next life, please meet me sooner.
Isabella said, letting go. She fell rapidly, hitting the ground with a sickening thud. Seeing Isabella's fate, James began to worry. He could feel himself slipping. Emily used all her strength to hand Tommy to James. Once she saw James safely place Tommy aside, she finally breathed a sigh of relief.
James, let go. If you don't, we'll both fall.
Emily felt herself and James slipping. She appreciated everything James had done for her, even though she couldn't remember her lost memories. She sensed that James was a man worth trusting.
Emily, I will never let go of your hand again.
James said, gritting his teeth, trying to pull her up, but he could feel himself slipping.
James, take care of Tommy for me. Tell him I love him.
Emily, if you have something to say to Tommy, come up and tell him yourself.
James said, holding onto her arm with all his might.
James, if I really am the woman you loved for 8 years, I'm grateful. Thank you for loving me.
Emily tried to pry James's hand off. He shouldn't suffer for her.
No!
James tried to stop her, but Emily's hand slipped from his grasp. Watching her close her eyes peacefully, James leaped after her.
Emily, I will never let go of your hand again.
Emily never imagined that James would follow her so recklessly.
James, why are you so foolish?
Emily said, then tightly hugged James's waist, laughing happily. With a thud, James felt himself land on something soft. He opened his eyes and saw an air cushion below them. James looked up and saw Michael following the police towards them.
Emily, we're alive.
James shouted joyfully, but when he turned back, he realized Emily had fainted. Knowing her weak heart, he immediately picked her up and rushed to the hospital. Soon, Michael also arrived at the hospital with Tommy.
How is Emily?
Watching the emergency room lights stay on, Michael felt anxious. James didn't speak. He couldn't imagine what might happen next. He could only silently pray for Emily. James suddenly remembered Tommy and saw that he was also being treated. He felt utterly useless. After a long while, James slowly lifted his head. He had many questions for Michael, especially regarding Emily's past.
3 years ago, why didn't Emily pass away? And why did you secretly take her away?
Michael seemed to have anticipated this question. He took out an old notebook from his bag and handed it to James. James glanced at the notebook and immediately recognized Emily's handwriting. A note was tucked into the front page, a letter Emily had written to Michael 3 years ago. It turned out that 3 years ago, Emily thought she would not survive the operation, so she left a letter for both James and Michael. The only difference was that she chose Michael to take her away. James set the letter aside and began to read Emily's notebook.
Today, I went to the hospital for a checkup. The doctor found severe damage to my heart. What should I do? Watching James busy with exams every day, I decided not to tell him about my condition. His life shouldn't be as dark as mine. Today, I finally decided to leave James. I begged Michael to take me away. I know James will hate me, but I can't selfishly drag him down. James, forget about me. On the 628th day after leaving James, I was pushed into the emergency room for the first time. I thought I was going to pass away. I wasn't afraid, but I wanted to see James one last time. To raise money for my father's surgery, I sold myself. What I didn't expect was that the person was James. I finally became James's woman.
The notebook was filled with Emily's daily life. James struggled to hold back his tears.
Today, I am going to pass away. James, will you occasionally think of me after I'm gone? The doctor told me the surgery failed. My father didn't survive the operation, but I miraculously did. The doctor asked Michael to take me away from the hospital and arranged for a heart transplant in a foreign hospital. The surgery was successful, but I have significant memory issues. I often can't remember what happened before.
The diary ended there, perhaps because Emily, due to the heart transplant, had forgotten her habit of keeping a diary. James slowly closed the notebook. He wished he could gently hold Emily and tell her not to be afraid, that he would always be by her side. Suddenly, a nurse rushed out in a panic.
It's not good, the child is in critical condition.
James's heart clenched, and he quickly followed the nurse to the emergency room.
The patient's blood type is quite rare, and our blood bank doesn't have it at the moment. Is any of you a relative of the child? We need a blood transfusion immediately.
James immediately pushed Michael towards the emergency room.
You go. You're Tommy's father.
Seeing Michael's indifferent demeanor, James wished he could kick him into the room.
No, you go.
Michael turned calmly to James and pushed him into the emergency room. The nurse quickly verified James's blood type, and once confirmed, they began to collect the plasma. James cried. It turned out Tommy was his child. He and Emily finally had a child of their own. James quietly watched Tommy's chubby face and smiled with joy. 2 years later, in a luxurious castle, James was holding the chubby Tommy, eagerly waiting for Emily's arrival. Over the past 2 years, Emily had slowly remembered all the past events. She recalled the times James humiliated her after buying her, and how he made her take off the small suit jacket in front of so many people.
I remember how you hurt me.
But Emily also remembered how, in that abandoned industrial building, James had jumped down without hesitation, holding her hands tightly. She felt his heartbeat.
What is deeply remembered will eventually echo back.
In the end, Emily chose to forgive James. She owed herself a husband and owed Tommy a father.